Welcome to the Pipeline Safety Orientation. This video is intended to be an orientation for employees who will work on a pipeline right-of-way or pipeline facility. You need to remember that safety is a core value. You are important to us, and our success depends on you. At the same time, you are important as a team member working to help keep everyone safe at the job site. Accident prevention is good business. It increases productivity and minimizes human suffering. Management is responsible for providing a reasonable and safe workplace. Employees are ultimately responsible for their own personal safety. They must follow safe work practices as a condition of employment. We know of no job that cannot be done safely. Don't take shortcuts. Don't take risks. There is only one way to do your job, the safe way. Always talk with your supervisor if something looks unsafe, or if you see a hazard that could injure you or others. Most workplace injuries are caused by unsafe acts, such as taking shortcuts or not following safe working procedures. Anyone observed violating a safety rule or procedure will be told how to do the job safely and why this is important. Safety is not just part of your job, it is a requirement for your employment. Proper procedures and controls reduce risks to health and safety. Following the rules also helps protect the environment. That's why all employees must follow project guidelines and comply with all applicable state and federal regulations. One of the keys to performing any task safely and efficiently is having the proper tools. Daily work permits, JSAs, job safety analysis, and tailgate safety meetings are tools to help remind us to work safely. When used properly, it guides us to ask questions about the procedures or work that we are about to perform. These questions can ensure we have not overlooked anything obvious that will cause harm to other persons, the equipment, our environment, and/or ourselves. The process also helps inform and protect individuals who may not be fully aware about the specific day's events. An additional vital function of the daily work permits, JSAs, job safety analysis, and tailgate safety meetings are communications. A good, clear understanding of what work is to be performed and the equipment impacted is absolutely necessary to ensure the safety of all involved. All hazards or environmentally sensitive situations should be assessed and addressed daily at the tailgate safety meeting. Special meetings should be called every time a new task is started, a new hazard presents itself, or a new worker is brought onto the job. It is the company's policy that each worker has the right and responsibility to stop any task that they feel is unsafe until the conditions are addressed and safe work practices determined. No worker will be penalized in any way for raising a legitimate safety concern. The possession, use, or sale of alcohol, drugs, or drug paraphernalia, weapons, firearms, explosives, or any other hazardous material is strictly prohibited on any company property or project job site. The company's disciplinary system in support of safety does not exist to punish employees. Its purpose is to help control the work environment so that workers are protected and accidents are prevented. The disciplinary system helps ensure workplace safety and health by letting the company's employees know what is expected of them. It provides workers with opportunities to correct their behavior before an accident happens. Employees need to know the company's position on safety and health and what the company expects of them. They need a clear understanding of the rules and the consequences of breaking those rules. This is true in all areas of work, but it is especially important for worker safety and health. The company safety director, company managers, and supervisors will always be on the lookout for safety violations and will conscientiously and vigorously enforce the company's commitment to safety. On a company job site, The site supervisor has specific responsibility for enforcing company safety rules, policies, and safe work practices. The company will conduct periodic inspections of work areas to ensure compliance with safety rules and policies. Disciplinary violations that are grounds for immediate suspension and penalties up to and including termination of employment specifically include fighting, provoking, or engaging in an act of violence against another person on company property, failure to follow written or verbal safe work procedures, company safety rules or authorized posted safety instructions, willful damage to property, failure to wear personal protective equipment, eye protection, hearing protection, safety helmets, etc. Not using safety harnesses and lanyards when fall protection is required. Removing and or making inoperative safety guards on tools and equipment. Tampering with machine safeguards or removing machine tags or locks. Removing barriers and or guardrails and not replacing them. Failure to follow recognized industry practices. Failure to follow rules regarding the use of company equipment or materials. Major traffic violations while using a company vehicle. Engaging in dangerous horseplay. Failure to notify the company of a hazardous situation. And theft. Disciplinary actions need to be proportionate to the seriousness of the offense and the frequency of its occurrence. It is certainly inappropriate to fire someone for occasional tardiness. It is equally inappropriate to issue only oral warnings to an employee who repeatedly removes a machine guard. Disciplinary procedures should not be instituted without explanation. The company will provide feedback to the employee on what behavior is unacceptable, why the corrective action is necessary, and how the employee can prevent future violations and disciplinary action. In addition, supervisors should take time to recognize an employee who improves or corrects his or her behavior. The company has a serious commitment towards safety for all employees and contractors. True or false? Safety is part of the job and a condition of employment. True or false? Hazard identification is the systematic observation and identification of unsafe acts, unsafe conditions, management systems, procedures, and equipment. Hazard identification is a part of risk assessment in which the hazards are identified for further investigation. Once the hazards are identified, then proper measures can be taken to eliminate them. Studies indicate that most workplace injuries or near misses are caused by unsafe behaviors, not unsafe conditions. At the same time, unsafe conditions known to management and left uncorrected affect behaviors. The company's Job Safety Observation Program is intended to encourage employees and management to correct hazardous conditions and change unsafe behaviors through positive reinforcement in the context of real-life daily activities. JSA's Job Safety Analysis will be utilized on a schedule and in the manner determined in coordination with the company's management and safety coordinator, as well as the host employers or general contractors' designated person or persons for site safety management. Employees and contractor personnel will utilize and be actively involved in processes for identifying workplace hazards and evaluating risk in accordance with this program and the procedures specified herein. JSAs and other hazard risk evaluation processes will be utilized for both routine and non-routine work operations, as well as whenever there is a change or supplement to procedures in place that could impact the safety and health of employees and other persons at the work location. Every job needs a JSA. Hazards identified through processes in this program will be classified, and corrective actions will be prioritized based on potential severity and estimated probability. All identified hazards will be corrected or mitigated in a timely, appropriate manner. Those that are most severe and/or have the highest likelihood of occurrence will be given priority. These processes will be performed in cooperation with and under review of the company's safety coordinator prior to taking any hazard abatement or mitigation action. This prior review may include consultation with persons knowledgeable and experienced with the specific hazard or risk situation to help ensure that proposed actions will not inadvertently create other hazards or risks. Corrective actions to an identified hazard will be tracked, confirmed, and documented by the project superintendent, supervisor, or manager in accordance with procedures specified in the company's written accident prevention plan. The company safety coordinator will review reports and documentations of corrective actions taken. This will be done to help confirm that the hazard has been effectively eliminated or mitigated. Risk control is the process of implementing measures to reduce the risk associated with a hazard. The control process must follow the control hierarchy in order as prescribed in company safety procedures and in accordance with federal and state OSHA requirements. It is important that control measures do not introduce new hazards and that the ongoing effectiveness of the controls is monitored. Risk control hierarchy ranks risk control measures in decreasing order of effectiveness. Elimination of hazard, substitution of hazardous processes or materials with safer ones, engineering controls, administrative controls, and personal protective equipment. The company safety coordinator, with assistance from superintendents, supervisors, managers, and other qualified personnel, as designated by the safety coordinator, will be responsible for developing and delivering site-specific training on how to implement this program effectively. Training will include instruction in the proper selection and use of personal protective equipment, PPE, regarding both hazards under evaluation and also as may be required for abatement or mitigation activities. Individual training will be documented in writing with date, time, and place of training, the names of personnel trained, the name of the person or persons presenting the training, and a copy of the training material. The training documentation will become part of the project safety file in accordance with company record-keeping procedures. All identified hazards will be corrected. 1. After your work is completed. 2. In a timely and appropriate manner. 3. Before your supervisor catches you. 4. The following workday. Studies indicate that most workplace injuries or near misses are caused by unsafe behaviors. True or false? Lifting and carrying are parts of the job. Back injuries don't have to be. A hazard assessment must be completed. The assessment will consider size, bulk, and weight of the object. If any mechanical lifting equipment will be needed, 2 people are necessary to do the lift and the pathways are clear and whether vision is obscured. Following safe lifting procedures is a condition of employment. Before you lift something, be sure that you can safely handle it by yourself. When possible, use a lifting device, a dolly, cart, forklift, crane, and hoist. Mechanical lifting equipment must be inspected before use and operated according to the manufacturer's specifications. Before you manually lift a load, test it to see if it is too heavy or awkward for you to lift alone. If you need help, don't try to do it alone. Avoid lifting loads that are above shoulder height. If the load is manageable, follow these rules for safe lifting. Make sure your footing is firm. Check the pathway to be sure it is clear of trip and slip hazards or obstructions. Lift with the strong muscles in your leg, not your weaker back muscles. Keep your back as straight as possible. Do not lean over to lift. Turn by moving your feet, not by twisting your body. Tuck your pelvis by tightening your stomach muscles. This helps maintain the normal curvature of your spine. Hug the load. Try to hold the object you are lifting as close to your body as possible as you gradually straighten your legs to a standing position. Try to keep your back as straight up and down as possible. Avoid twisting. Twisting can overload your spine and lead to serious injury. If you must, turn using your feet, not your waist. Make sure your feet, knees, and torso are pointed in the same direction when lifting and carrying. Use these same techniques when setting down your load. Bending at your knees, leaning over at the waist, and lifting while your back is in line with the floor is an improper lifting position. It puts unnecessary and avoidable strain on the back even when the load you are lifting is comparatively light. Leaning over to lift is an improper method and is expressly prohibited. Supervision is responsible for identifying, correcting, and documenting potential hazards and reporting findings to the company's safety director. Work areas and techniques will be assessed periodically to evaluate hazards. In the event of musculoskeletal injury, the incident must be investigated and documented. These findings will be used to prevent future injuries. Notify your supervisor at the beginning of the shift if you have back pain or have suffered back strain or injury while off duty. This is important because if you have suffered back strain or injury off the job, a fall, sports, or some other injury, you must not begin work without discussing it with your supervisor first. If a load is too heavy for you to manage alone, you should take special precautions, get help, tell your supervisor after you do the lift, tell your supervisor if you hurt your back while making the lift. The basic rule for safe lifting is bend at your waist, not with your knees. Let the strong muscles in your legs do the lifting. Bend with your knees, not at your waist. 2 and 3 above. Which of the following are also important considerations for lifting and carrying loads safely? Do not twist your back. Keep your back as straight up and down as possible. Hug the load as close to your body as possible. All of the above. If you think you have injured your back while at work, when should you notify your supervisor? At the end of your shift, before you start work the next week, when pain is so great that you know you must be seen by a doctor, immediately, as soon as the injury happens. One of the most important safety precautions for any job is the proper selection and use of personal protective equipment. The company will give employees PPE training that covers the proper use, how to put on and take off PPE, the proper care and maintenance and limitations. Retraining may be needed if the employee does not have the required understanding or changes occur in the workplace. This training will be documented. Selection of PPE will be based on company supervision's written and signed assessment of the hazards associated with the job site, and the recommendations included on the safe work permit provided by the host employer or general contractor. Prior to the beginning of any job task, company supervision will determine the PPE necessary to safeguard the employees assigned to do the work. When the job task is complicated in nature, the site supervisor and the host employer or general contractor safety representative will be consulted for their expertise in determining the proper PPE for the task. PPE. Work using powered equipment, tools, or chemicals may require PPE for your eyes, face, hands, ears, or other parts of your body. Always read the product label, safety data sheet for chemicals, or the tool or machine manufacturer's instructions before you start work. Use PPE as specified. Let's make one point very clear about PPE. Hard hats, safety glasses with side shields, and proper safety toe footwear are required on all job sites. Methods of eye protection include safety glasses with side shields, splash goggles, face shields, and welding goggles. Safety glasses with side shields are appropriate for work that could cause something to strike your eyes. Other tasks may require a full face shield worn over your safety glasses. Check with your supervisor. When you are mixing or using a chemical, you must wear well-fitting safety splash goggles. Regular eyeglasses or sunglasses are not adequate for eye protection for work. There are many general hazards that can endanger your eyes and face. For example, flying or falling objects such as metal chips, pieces of wood, or debris. Splashing chemicals and corrosives. Swinging objects such as ropes, chains, tree limbs, pressurized air or liquids. Glare and heat. Head protection usually means wearing a hard hat. Remember, hard hats are required on all job sites and where on-the-job situations expose you to flying or falling objects, work being performed overhead, electrical shock or burns and objects or structures where you could strike your head while doing a task. Hard hats must be of a type that is appropriate for the work being performed. Follow these rules for wearing a hard hat. Do not wear your hard hat on top of any other cap or headgear. In cold weather, wear close-fitting winter liners that are designed for use with hard hats. Make sure the headband is adjusted to the right size and your hat sits squarely on your head, not tipped back or to one side. Do not drill ventilation holes in the shell. This can weaken the shell. Never paint the shell. Solvents in the paint may soften the shell material, reducing its electrical insulating properties. Never carry objects such as cigarettes or tools inside the hard hat. They can compromise the hard hat's shock-absorbing capabilities. Hearing protection means using earplugs, earmuffs, or ear cups to reduce loud noises and sounds entering your ears. These types of protective devices provide important insulation from loud noise in the workplace. If an area is designated as a high-noise area or the task involves high noise levels, you must wear proper hearing protection. The employer will evaluate hearing protector attenuation for the specific noise environments in which the protector will be used. Hearing conservation is the responsibility of your employer to monitor noise levels if employees are exposed to sound levels 85 decibels or greater on an 8-hour time-weighted average. Employees exposed to high sound levels will receive initial and annual training, as well as training when there have been changes in the work process, or PPE. The employer will provide, at no cost to the employee, hearing protection and training on the proper use, care, and fitting of protectors. All employees in a hearing conservation program should have baseline and annual hearing tests. Baseline audiometrics testing helps the employer to determine the presence or absence of a pre-existing hearing loss and may assist the employer in determining job placement for the employee. Annual audiometric testing assesses the effectiveness of the hearing conservation program. Each annual audiometric test is compared with the employee's baseline test to determine if there has been any deterioration in the employee's hearing. Testing to establish a baseline audiogram will be preceded by at least 14 hours without exposure to workplace noise. Hearing protectors may be used as a substitute for the requirement that baseline audiograms be preceded by 14 hours without exposure to workplace noise. If a comparison of the annual audiogram to the baseline audiogram indicates a standard threshold shift, the employer will be informed of this fact in writing within 21 days of the determination. If a threshold shift has occurred, use of hearing protection shall be reevaluated and/or refitted, and if necessary, a medical evaluation may be required. There are no better alternatives than quality audiometric testing to determine if workers are protected from the damaging effects of noise. Records of employee exposure and audiometric requirements will be maintained. Sounds louder than 85 decibels are potentially dangerous. Both the amount of noise and the length of time of exposure determine the amount of damage. Hair cells in the inner ear and the hearing nerve can be damaged by intense, brief impulses like an explosion, or by continuous and/or repeated exposure to noise. Here's the OSHA guideline for permissible noise exposure. Here are a few warning signs of overexposure to hazardous noise. You must raise your voice to be heard. You can't hear someone 2 feet away from you. Speech around you sounds muffled or dull after leaving a noise area. You have pain or ringing on your ears, tinnitus after exposure to noise. Proper selection and use of hand protection can prevent a range of injuries to hands and fingers. Injuries suffered when cutting or using tools, handling rough or sharp items, using hazardous chemicals, or working with electricity all may require the use of gloves as PPE. As with other types of PPE, it is essential that you select the type of glove that will provide proper protection for the task. For example, heavy-duty leather gloves can prevent injuries from cuts, scrapes, splinters, and punctures. Chemical-resistant gloves protect your hands from contact with corrosive or harmful materials. Make sure that you select and use gloves that are manufactured specifically as protection against the type of chemical you are working with. Check the product label or safety data sheet for specifications about the type of protective gloves to use. Hand and finger injuries can involve cuts and punctures, broken and crushed bones, even full or partial amputation. Cuts or punctures may seem minor on the surface, but if they go through the skin, they can sever nerves, tendons, or ligaments. Wounds and burns also can get infected. Gloves can protect hands against exposure to irritants that can cause dermatitis or symptoms like swelling, itching, rash, burning, or blisters. Types of hand protection include insulated gloves for heat or cold, special insulated rubber gloves for electricity, metal mesh or other cut-resistant gloves for handling sharp objects, leather gloves for rough or sharp-edged surfaces, fabric gloves for handling slippery objects, neoprene or nitrile rubber gloves for working with chemicals or corrosives. Foot protection means wearing boots or shoes designed for the work environment. You are required to wear safety-toed footwear with a well-defined heel on all company job sites. Protective footwear must be of sturdy construction, in good condition, with nothing hanging loose. It must have leather uppers and non-slip soles. And one more thing, always wear socks with shoes. Respiratory protection includes use of disposable dust masks, cartridge type, and air-supplied respirators. Always read the SDS for chemicals to see if special respiratory protection is required. Follow SDS instructions carefully. It is OSHA's long-standing policy that engineering and work practice controls must be the primary means to reduce employee exposure to toxic chemicals, where feasible. Respiratory protection is required to be used if engineering or work practice controls are infeasible or while engineering controls are being implemented. The company will provide appropriate respiratory protection at no cost to workers, provide appropriate training and education regarding its use, and ensure that workers use it properly. Employers are required to identify and evaluate the respiratory hazard or hazards in their workplaces. Various types of occupational exposure limits have been established by a number of organizations and are listed on many of OSHA's safety and health web pages on chemical hazards and toxic substances. OSHA sets enforceable permissible exposure limits, PELs, to protect workers against the health effects of exposure to hazardous substances, including limits on the airborne concentrations of hazardous chemicals in the air. Most OSHA PELs are 8-hour time-weighted averages, TWA, although there are also ceiling and peak limits, and many chemicals include a skin designation to warn against skin contact. Approximately 500 PELs have been established. Most of OSHA's PELs for general industry are contained in 1910-1000 air contaminants and are listed by chemical name in tables Z1, Z2, and Z3. The standards for marine terminals and longshoring both incorporate the General Industry Standards 1910 Subpart Z. If use of a respirator is specified, you must undergo a pulmonary function test and complete special safety training in advance. Do not wear a respirator unless you have been medically examined, properly fit tested, and trained. Fall protection equipment includes personal fall arrest systems and components, harness, lanyards, shock absorbers, snaps, hooks, Fall protection must be used any time that you are working on an elevation higher than 6 feet or in some cases less, and in close proximity to an unguarded edge. Personnel must have special training for the proper selection and use of fall protection equipment and recognizing the hazards of falling and how to minimize the hazard. If the work changes or fall equipment changes, then additional training will be needed. A written certification is required to prove that you have received and understood the training. A fall protection plan must be provided by a qualified person for each work site. In the event an employee falls or some other related serious incident occurs, like a near miss, the employer will investigate the circumstances of the fall or other incident to determine if the fall protection plan needs to be changed, and shall make those changes to prevent similar types of falls or incidents. Should a fall occur, the employer shall provide for prompt rescue of employees in the event of a fall, or shall assure that employees are able to rescue themselves. All fall protection equipment must meet ANSI and ATSM standards. Check with your supervisor if you believe that a work situation requires fall protection. If fall protection is required for a task, do not perform the work without the proper equipment and training. Here's another thing to keep in mind. Part of your job is to keep your personal protective equipment clean and properly stored. If employee-owned PPE is allowed, it must be approved by your employer before it is used. Inspect PPE before use. If your equipment needs repair or replacement, tell your supervisor immediately. Hard hats, safety glasses with side shields, and safety-toed footwear are required on all company job sites. True or false? The company allows anyone to wear and use a respirator if the job requires it. True or false? All personnel working on a company job site must undergo which of the following before they can wear a respirator? A pulmonary function test, fit test, special training on proper selection, use, and storage of the respirator, all of the above. If noise at a work site is so loud that you have difficulty hearing normal conversation from people standing 2 or 3 feet from you, you may need to use hearing protection. True or false? All employees in a hearing conservation program should have an audiogram conducted when hired by the company, annually, not required unless the employee requests it, A and B. Employees working with sound levels louder than 85 decibels are in danger of having hearing damage depending on the length of the exposure time. True or false? The type of hand protection needed is based on the type of work being done. True or false? Leather gloves are usually your best protection for working with rough or sharp-edged surfaces. True or false? Neoprene or nitrile rubber gloves are usually your best selection when working with chemicals or corrosives. True or false? Which of the following series of PPE require special training in addition to this safety orientation? Eye protection, respiratory protection, fall protection, 2 and 3 above. Do not operate powered machines, tools, or equipment unless you have been trained and authorized by the company. Before you work with a powered machine for the first time, you must read the operations manual. Make sure that you know the contents such as personal protective equipment required when working with the machine, location of emergency stop buttons and safety switches, the meaning of labels for emergencies and warnings, operation of switches and electrical control devices, operation of pneumatics, hydraulics, and other controls, proper procedures for changing components, instruction for speed controls and adjustments, safe maintenance, fueling, and adjustments to the machine. Safe use of any attachments, automatic feeders, sensors, or similar devices. How to perform a safe and proper shutdown of the machine. Pre-use inspections on equipment must be completed and documented. The seat belt must be worn while operating motor vehicles and powered equipment with rollover protection or a protected operating cab. Backup alarms must be installed and working on all equipment. All booms and blades must be lowered while equipment is not in use. Use spotters, rear-view mirrors, and other aids to increase visibility. Now for a warning. Repair work to a powered machine, tool, or equipment can only be performed by trained and qualified personnel. Do not attempt to make repairs yourself without specific permission from your supervisor. Before anyone works on powered equipment, lockout, tagout procedures must be followed that effectively isolate all energy sources to the specific machine, tool, or equipment being de-energized. Do not operate equipment around overhead power lines unless you are authorized and trained to do so. When operating near energized lines or equipment, aerial lift equipment must maintain the minimum approach distance unless the insulated portion of the aerial lift is operated by a qualified employee. If necessary, another worker must be a spotter for the operator to ensure the minimum approach distance is maintained. A spotter is needed when the point of operation, meaning the load travel or the area near or at load placement, is not in full view of the operator. When the equipment is traveling, the view in the direction of travel is obstructed. During operations requiring signals, the ability to transmit signals between the operator and signal person must be maintained. If that ability is interrupted at any time, the operator must safely stop operations requiring signals until it is reestablished and a proper signal is given and understood. Spotters need to be aware of all hazards. Anticipate situations in which a spotter would help prevent an incident. Spotters should be located in an area where the driver easily sees the spotter. Spotters cannot perform any other duties while directing a backing vehicle. They must receive training and wear appropriate PPE and a high-visibility vest. If an object, scaffolds, crane, etc., must be moved in the area of overhead power lines, appoint a competent worker whose sole responsibility is to watch the clearance between the power lines and the object. Warn others if the minimum distance is not maintained. Never touch an overhead line if it has been brought down by machinery or has fallen. Never assume lines are dead. When a machine is in contact with an overhead line, do not allow anyone to come near or touch the machine. Stay away from the machine and get help. Also, never touch a person who is in contact with a live power line. Maintain a safe distance of at least 10 feet and increase the safe distance near higher voltage power lines. You must be trained and authorized by the company before you can use powered equipment, tools, or equipment. True or false? Fire safety begins with fire prevention. Here are things that you can do to prevent a fire in the workplace. Observe all no smoking and no open flames signs at all job sites. Remember that smoking is prohibited on all job locations. Only approved safety containers are acceptable for transporting and handling flammable liquids. Keep a clean work area. Do not allow trash to pile up. Know the fire exits, evacuation routes, and designated gathering areas at all work locations. The designated gathering area is a predetermined space where personnel will meet in the event of an evacuation. A roll call will be taken there to ensure that everyone is accounted for. Keep traffic paths to fire exits, fire extinguishers, and emergency evacuation routes clear of obstructions. Know where fire extinguishers are located. Do not hang anything on a fire extinguisher. Don't block access to a fire extinguisher. Tell your supervisor if you have used a fire extinguisher or if you find one that needs service. Report any fire extinguisher that is missing the extinguisher bracket or pin. Fire extinguishers are installed throughout company facilities, in company vehicles, and on client facilities and job sites. Extinguishers are clearly marked with signs or labels. Fire extinguishers have been specifically placed in designated locations to be near you in the event of an emergency. Know where the fire extinguisher is in your work area. Fire extinguishers are classified according to the type of fire that they are designed to extinguish. The four most common classes of fires you may be likely to encounter are Class A, B, C, and D. Class A, ordinary combustibles are materials such as paper, wood, clothing, rubber, and some plastics. Class B, flammable are combustible liquids such as gasoline, kerosene, paint thinners, propane, and chemicals. Class C, energized electrical equipment, such as tools, appliances, or machines or circuits including wiring, plugs, fixtures, junctions, and panel or distribution boxes. Class D. They are for fires that involve combustible materials such as magnesium, titanium, potassium, and sodium. Always report any fire extinguisher which needs to be recharged, or when the gauge is not showing in the green zone. An indicator needle pointing out the green area into the red means that there may be too little or too much pressure. All extinguishers require documented monthly inspections and at least annual maintenance or service. A tag showing the last service date should be attached to extinguisher. You must be trained to use fire extinguishers, and you will receive annual refresher training after your initial training. Labeling showing the type of fire extinguisher should be clearly visible from the front of where the extinguisher is mounted. The pin should be in place and secured with a plastic tie seal. Notify your supervisor about any fire extinguisher that has been used. Arrangements then can be made to have it serviced. If an extinguisher is used even a little, it may continue to leak pressure. Over a few days, the pressure can discharge and the extinguisher will be unusable. Let's keep our fire extinguisher ready for when we might need them the most. Remember, pass, P-A-S-S, when using a fire extinguisher. P, break the seal and pull the pin or puncture the cartridge. A, aim the nozzle at the base of the fire. S, squeeze the trigger, stand away and move in on fire. S, sweep the extinguisher from side to side, covering the area of the fire. Use the extinguisher only if you are sure it is safe to do so and when the fire is in its beginning stage. Don't take chances. Smoking is prohibited on all company job sites except in specifically designated areas, inside of all company facilities, in all company vehicles, all of the above. Regarding emergency evacuation, the gathering area is a place where there are a number of hazards gathered together. True or false? If you notice that a fire extinguisher has been used or that the gauge is not in the green, you should report this to your supervisor immediately. True or false? Class A fire extinguishers are used to put out fires involving flammable or combustible liquids such as gasoline, kerosene, paint thinners, propane, and chemicals. True or false? When using a fire extinguisher, the letters PASS mean push, arm, save, survive, pass, ask, sit, sweep, point, alert, sweep, survive, pull, aim, squeeze, sweep. Despite all precautions, there always is the possibility of fire, chemical release, or other emergency at a work site. It is necessary to have an evacuation plan in place that everyone knows and understands. The emergency evacuation plan should designate primary and secondary escape routes from each workplace. If you're in a building or structure, the plan should show evacuation routes and exits for getting to the outside in the quickest, safest, and most direct manner. Evacuation route maps for a facility should be posted in a sufficient number of places for easy reference. If you're working outside, the emergency evacuation plan should identify a designated gathering place that's a safe distance from the emergency. Job site evacuation routes and designated gathering areas should be discussed in advance for the specific job site and situations. Usually, this should be done during the morning's tailgate safety meeting. In any evacuation, all personnel should go to the designated gathering area and remain there until a roll call can be taken. The roll call confirms that all on-duty personnel are accounted for. Never re-enter an evacuated building or job site for any reason until your supervisor has announced the all clear. Emergency evacuation plans include maps posted in an area to show escape routes and also the location of the gathering area. True or false? Under what circumstances should you re-enter an evacuated building or area on a company facility? When the fire is out and smoke has cleared, when the all clear is given by a supervisor, when you see someone else re-enter, when it is necessary to save someone's life. You have a right to understand about any hazardous chemicals that you may work with or around while doing your job. Chemical hazards and toxic substances pose a wide range of health hazards, such as irritation, sensitization, and carcinogenicity, and physical hazards such as flammability, corrosion, and reactivity. OSHA's Toxic and Hazardous Substances Standard 1910, Subpart Z, requires special training requirements when working with the substances listed within it. It is OSHA's long-standing policy that engineering and work practice controls be the primary means to reduce employee exposure to toxic chemicals where feasible. Respiratory protection is required to be used if engineering or work practice controls are infeasible or while engineering controls are being implemented. The company will provide appropriate respiratory protection at no cost to workers, provide appropriate training and education regarding its use, and ensure that workers use it properly. Employers are required to identify and evaluate the respiratory hazard or hazards in their workplaces. Various types of occupational exposure limits have been established by a number of organizations and are listed on many of OSHA's safety and health web pages on chemical hazards and toxic substances. OSHA sets enforceable permissible exposure limits, or PELs, to protect workers against the health effects of exposure to hazardous substances, including limits on the airborne concentrations of hazardous chemicals in the air. Most OSHA PELs are 8-hour time-weighted averages, TWA, although there are also ceiling and peak limits, and many chemicals include a skin designation to warn against skin contact. Approximately 500 PELs have been established. Most of OSHA's PELs for general industry are contained in 1910.1000 air contaminants and are listed by chemical name in tables Z1, Z2, and Z3. The standards for marine terminals and longshoring both incorporate the General Industry Standards 1910, Subpart Z. The company has a written hazard communications program that makes this information available at every work location. These procedures are in place to comply with company safety rules and requirements of OSHA's Hazard Communication Standard. The Hazard Communication Standard is now aligned with the Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals, GHS. This update to the Hazard Communication Standard will provide a common approach to classifying chemicals and communicating hazard information on labels and safety data sheets. Under these programs, all personnel must be trained about their right to understand regarding hazardous chemicals at work. Employees will be trained on hazardous chemicals in their work area at the time of their initial assignment and whenever a new chemical is introduced into their work area. Also, specific training is needed for non-routine tasks. Information and training may be designed to cover categories of hazards or specific chemicals. Chemical-specific information must always be available through labels and safety data sheets. Chemical manufacturers and importers are required to provide a label that provides a harmonized signal word, pictogram, hazard statement, precautionary statement, and name, address, and telephone number of the chemical manufacturer or importer. The company maintains a copy of the Written Hazard Communication Program, a chemical inventory list, and safety data sheets, SDSs, for each hazardous chemical authorized for use at the job site. They are kept in the SDS manual. Safety data sheets are available for you to read and use at any time while you are at work. The Hazard Communication Standard requires chemical manufacturers, distributors, or importers to provide safety data sheets to communicate the hazards of hazardous chemical products. The Hazard Communication Standard requires SDSs to be in a uniform format and include the section numbers, the headings, and associated information under the headings below. Identification, hazard identification, composition, information on ingredients, first aid measures, firefighting measures, accidental release measures, handling and storage, exposure controls, personal protection, physical and chemical properties, stability and reactivity, toxicological information, ecological information, disposal considerations, transport information, regulatory information, other information. Always read the label or safety data sheet before using a chemical product. Follow instructions. Do not mix paints, solvents, or other chemicals together unless label instructions tell you to do so. As a rule, if you get a chemical on your body, wash it off immediately. Tell your supervisor about any suspicious or unanticipated chemical release, spill, or leak. Seek first aid if necessary. If you have questions about a chemical, ask your supervisor. All chemicals must be stored in the original or approved container with a proper label on the container. Any container not properly labeled with health, fire, reactivity, and other specific hazards information should be given to the job site supervisor for labeling or proper disposal. Information that you need to know about working with the chemical product safely is on the label and SDS. Always follow these instructions for safe handling, use, and storage of chemicals. SDSs and written programs will be made available for multiple employer job site and work sites. Now, let's consider basic safety and common sense rules for working with chemical products. Keep chemical containers closed when not in use. Check containers regularly for leaks. Keep flammables, spontaneous combustibles, and explosive materials away from heat sources. When required, check protective clothing before use to be sure there are no rips or tears. Wash hands thoroughly before eating, drinking, or working. Thoroughly clean tools, machinery, equipment, PPE, and clothing that have been exposed to hazardous chemicals before they are used again. Dispose of all materials contaminated with the chemical product properly and in accordance with SDS instructions. SDS stands for Standard Developed for Safety, Safety Data Sheets, Safe Delivery of Substances, Safety Data Standards. A product's SDS tells you what kind of personal protective equipment to use when working with that chemical product. True or false? Employees do not have a right to understand about the hazards associated with chemicals they may come in contact with while at work. True or false? A book containing SDSs is kept on the job site or workplace, and employees can see this book at any time while at work. True or false? Many programs have been created to protect the environment since the first environmental laws were created in 1970. Governments and communities are paying more attention to pollution in the air, soil, and water. Some of the major environmental issues include chemical spills, water pollution, asbestos, PCB and lead abatement, and hazardous waste disposal. You must be trained and wear specialized protective equipment to work with asbestos, PCBs, and lead. Employees exposed to these materials must be in a medical monitoring program. In addition to laws that deal with specific chemicals, there are numerous laws that control pollution like the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, Toxic Substance Control Act, and many more. The company must be familiar with these environmental concerns and develop a plan to deal with them. Proper chemical handling is the best defense against spills, exposures, and accidents. A good chemical management program will contain information on safety, SDSs, PPE, storage, spills, and disposal. Chemicals should be stored in a safe manner, keeping them in approved containers that are properly labeled. Spill prevention and containment materials must be readily available. Some rules for good chemical management include: keep hazards separate. Don't keep flammables next to caustics. Keep containers away from excessive heat. Protect containers from accidental puncture. Have spill and cleanup materials in the storage area. Post appropriate warning signs. Chemical spill prevention is cheaper than hazardous waste removal. Use secondary containment. In the case of a chemical or fuel leak, cleanup will be easier and ground beneath will be safe from contamination. When chemicals are spilled, the cleanup materials may be hazardous waste. Hazardous waste must be handled and disposed of properly. Pollution prevention and waste minimization are parts of a best practices plan. Good housekeeping will minimize waste. Separate chemical or hazardous waste from general construction debris. Even a small amount of hazardous substance in a container of waste makes the whole container hazardous waste. The construction right-of-way must be maintained in a clean, neat condition at all times. All ground disturbances, project vehicles, and equipment will be confined to approved work areas, construction zone limits. Use only approved access roads. No off-road vehicle activity is allowed. Monitor during construction in areas that have not been fenced to prevent unauthorized impacts. Minimize impacts of transmission, pipeline alignments, road and staging areas by staying within project limits. Avoid using toxic substances that could potentially harm wildlife. Clean up and report all hazardous material spills immediately. Do not litter, including food scraps. Trash and food items will be contained in closed, secured containers and removed daily. Do not discharge water into unapproved areas. Minimize standing water. Smoking should be limited to designated smoking areas. Cigarette butts and cigars should be disposed of appropriately and not left on the ground or buried. Gasoline and other flammable liquids should be stored in an approved storage facility. Inspect pipes or culverts greater than 3 inches in diameter for wildlife before moving or capping. Inspect open trenches for wildlife each morning before starting work. Do not feed or harass wildlife. Proper chemical handling is the best defense against spills, exposures, and accidents. True or false? You do not need to be trained and wear specialized protective equipment to work with asbestos, PCBs, and lead. True or false? If you are injured on the job, notify your supervisor immediately. No matter how insignificant the injury may seem, report it. Your supervisor will make sure that you receive prompt first aid and, if necessary, professional medical attention. If you suffer a fall, report it to your supervisor, even if you do not think you are hurt. In the absence of an infirmary, clinic, or hospital in near proximity to the workplace, which is used for the treatment of all injured employees, a person or persons shall be adequately trained to render first aid. Adequate first aid supplies shall be readily available. Proper equipment for prompt transportation of the injured person to a physician or hospital, or a communication system for contacting necessary ambulance service shall be provided. Where the eyes or body of any person may be exposed to injurious corrosive materials, suitable facilities for quick drenching or flushing of the eyes and body shall be provided within the work area for immediate emergency use. Each company facility and company-owned vehicle at job sites has a first aid kit. The company also maintains one or more first aid kits at the job site. You need to know the location of first aid kits in your work area. The contents of the first aid kit shall be placed in a weatherproof container with individual sealed packages for each type of item, and shall be checked by the employer before being sent out on each job, and at least weekly on each job to ensure that the expended items are replaced. This is important so that you will have the supplies needed to give yourself first aid for minor injuries. If you give first aid to another person, the first aid kit contains latex medical gloves to help protect you from direct exposure to blood-borne pathogens that may be in the blood, body fluids, or detached tissue of the victim. The kit also contains a one-way face mask as another protection against blood-borne pathogens when giving cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR. If you use the last of any item in a first aid kit or notice that supplies are missing, tell your supervisor so that it can be replaced. In areas where 911 is not available, the telephone numbers of the physicians, hospitals, or ambulances will be conspicuously posted by the site supervisor. Now let's consider the decisions you may have to make if a serious injury or illness occurs at a job site. Decisions about first aid for the victim, calling for emergency medical assistance, and what should be done until help arrives. You may have had first aid and CPR training either through your work or off the job, in school or the military. You must obtain a valid certificate and training to perform CPR and first aid. Just remember, when you give first aid or CPR, it is important that you protect yourself against exposure to blood-borne pathogens that may be present in the victim's blood, body fluids, or detached tissues. For example, what if the victim's blood contains the potentially deadly hepatitis B or hepatitis C virus, or the HIV virus that is associated with AIDS, or some other blood-borne pathogen? Exposure can come from direct mouth contact when performing CPR or rescue breathing, or through contact with blood while applying a bandage, or when trying to stop severe bleeding. When giving first aid or CPR, you should take precautions against blood-borne pathogens by maintaining a barrier. For example, you can wear latex medical gloves that are provided in first aid kits. You can also wear your safety glasses to protect your eyes from blood contact. And when giving CPR or rescue breathing, you can use the one-way face mask that is also included in the first aid kits. Following a serious injury, there may be blood that has to be cleaned off of tools or equipment. During any such cleanup, you also need to protect yourself against contact with blood-borne pathogens. Use the same precautions and types of protection mentioned earlier: latex medical gloves and safety glasses. Cleaning includes disinfecting the contaminated area, clothing, and equipment with a solution of 1 part bleach to 10 parts water. Place any bloody bandages, clothing, or contaminated items in a labeled biohazard bag and treat it as regulated waste. If you are exposed to another person's blood while you are at work, by giving help or during cleanup, Tell your supervisor immediately. Because you cannot always know if someone is infected with HIV, hepatitis virus, or some other blood-borne pathogen, you must treat all blood bodily fluids and detached body tissue of other persons as if they were contaminated. True or false? When giving first aid, CPR, you should take precautions against blood-borne pathogens by maintaining a barrier, latex gloves, safety glasses, all of the above. First aid kits are located on all company vehicles and at a designated place on the job site or facility. True or false? You should report any workplace injury to your supervisor immediately. True or false? Investigating a worksite incident, a fatality, injury, illness, or close call, provides employers and workers the opportunity to identify hazards in their operations and shortcomings in their safety and health programs. It enables employers and workers to identify and implement the corrective actions necessary to prevent future incidents. Incident investigations that focus on identifying and correcting root causes, not on finding fault or blame, also improve workplace morale and increase productivity by demonstrating an employer's commitment to a safe and healthful workplace. Incident investigations are often conducted by a supervisor, but to be most effective, the investigation should include managers and employees working together, since each bring different knowledge, understanding, and perspectives to the investigation. In conducting an incident investigation, the team must look beyond the immediate causes of an incident. It is far too easy and often misleading to conclude that carelessness or failure to follow a procedure alone was the cause of an incident. To do so fails to discover the underlying or root causes of the incident, and therefore fails to identify the systemic changes and measures needed to prevent future incidents. When a shortcoming is identified, it is important to ask why it existed and why it was not previously addressed. Based upon severity and other situation-specific considerations, one or more methods of root cause analysis, RCA, then will be utilized to help identify and determine circumstances, events, behaviors, and other contributing factors to the incident. An incident reporting sequence will be followed in accordance with site-specific procedures at the work location. The reporting sequence is as follows. Call 911 or the facility's emergency response team immediately in accordance with host employer procedures to obtain the quickest emergency assistance. Call the host employer supervisor or designated contact without delay and no later than 24 hours after the incident. Call the company main office without delay during business hours and the company's safety coordinator after hours and on weekends. Call the local OSHA office within 8 hours if one or more employees are hospitalized or if there is a fatality. Employees and other personnel involved in the investigation will be trained and qualified in the methods, techniques, and responsibilities of the assignment. All employees will be trained to be aware of incident investigation requirements and procedures. First responders will be trained in first aid, CPR, protection from blood-borne pathogens, use of AED, and other specialized qualifications and skills as may be part of the company's work assignment to help control further loss. Company supervisors will be trained on the methods, techniques, and requirements for conduct of an initial incident investigation and reporting. Equipment necessary for the proper conduct of an incident investigation will be provided and available. Such equipment will include necessary personal protective equipment, pens and paper, camera, audio recorder, ruler and measuring tape, marking devices such as flags, warning tape for barricading around the scene, flashlights and temporary lighting as required. Equipment manuals, local work procedures, and other documentations that will be reviewed are referenced during the investigation. Initial investigation will include the preliminary assessment and collection of evidence. This includes making an initial list of persons, equipment, and materials involved, listing the names of witnesses and potential witnesses, noting environmental factors such as weather, wind direction, temperature, noise, illumination, ventilation, physical factors such as fatigue, age, and medical conditions, and other factors observed relating to the incident. Following initial rescue, medical response, and evacuation of injured persons, evidence of the incident scene will be preserved. The positions of persons, wreckage, equipment, parts, papers, and materials involved in the incident will be preserved, secured, and collected through notes, photographs, witness statements, flagging, and impoundment of physical evidence. Unauthorized persons will not be allowed access to the incident location. Interviewing of witnesses initially and for follow-up will be conducted at appropriate times and locations by individuals designated by the company. Interviewers will be trained in the techniques, methods, and skills of interviewing witnesses as part of their incident investigation qualification. Investigation results will be considered using root cause analysis, RCA, to determine specific corrections as required to prevent a reoccurrence. Specific individuals will be assigned to take each corrective action. Each action will be tracked to completion with documentation. A written report will be made based on the incident investigation. The report will include a completed incident investigation form and root cause analysis in the format as established by the company. The written report will include a detailed narrative that explains when, where, how, and why the incident occurred, the names, statements, and other information from or about persons involved, findings and recommendations. The report will include the name and role of each investigating participant. Witness statements, photos, videos, drawings, diagrams, reference, and other support materials will be included as part of the report. The report will be used to document and help communicate lessons learned from the incident, as well as corrections, changes, and measures taken to prevent reoccurrence of a similar event. Incident investigations should focus on identifying and correcting root causes, not on finding fault or blame. True or false? Unauthorized persons will be allowed to access the incident location. True or false? First responders will be trained in the following areas except 1. First aid, 2. CPR, 3. Physiological evaluation, 4. Bloodborne pathogens. Proper use of a tool is important for safety as well as doing the job effectively. Do not use a hand or power tool unless you have been trained on how to use it safely. Your supervisor must ensure that each employee under his or her authority demonstrates safe work practices. This includes the safe use of hand and power tools. All hand and power tools and similar equipment, whether furnished by the employer or the employee, must be maintained in a safe condition. If a power tool is equipped with a guard, the guard must be used and not disabled in any way. Belts, gears, shafts, pulleys, sprockets, spindles, drums, flywheels, chains, or other reciprocating, rotating, or moving parts of equipment shall be guarded if moving parts can come into contact with the employee. Guarding shall meet the requirements as set forth in ANSI B15.1-1953. Workers using hand and power tools and exposed to the hazard of falling, flying, abrasive, and splashing objects, or exposed to harmful dust, fumes, mists, vapors, or gases, shall be provided with the proper personal protective equipment necessary to protect them from the hazard. Inspect hand and power tools before you use it. Tell your supervisor if it is broken, defective, or inadequate for the task. Defective or broken tools must be tagged "Do not use" or made inoperable by locking the controls and removing the tool from the job site. Use the right tool for the job. If you're not sure about what is the right tool for a particular task, ask your supervisor. Keep all your tools in good condition. Store them properly when not in use. Always use the right tool for the job, and inspect any tool before you use it. True or false? Working below ground level in an excavation has some of the same potential hazards as confined space situations, plus the dangers associated with cave-ins and being buried under earth if the walls of the excavation collapse. Excavation accidents are deadly for several reasons. Many people only consider the risk of suffocation from being buried with the face covered by earth. But what is not always fully considered is the danger of suffocation even when the head and face are exposed to the air. Firefighters and rescue personnel will tell you about how they were able to clear the airway for a buried victim, only to have that victim suffocate due to the weight of the earth still covering the chest and abdomen. Like the squeeze of a giant python or anaconda snake, the incredible weight of the earth on top of a buried body makes it impossible for the chest to expand and take air into the lungs. The danger of cave-in and dirt collapsing into the excavation is why proper trenching and shoring safety measures must be in place before anyone enters the excavation. Individuals must have special training to be competent in trenching and shoring techniques. Like confined space safety training, trenching and shoring techniques go beyond the scope of this orientation. Pipelines must be accurately identified and located prior to excavation work. Digging in the wrong place wastes time and money. It can also cause accidental damage to pipe and expose employees and the public to injury and environmental hazards from an accidental release of product or hazardous material. The one-call system has been established nationally to help contractors have accurate information about underground pipelines and utilities before they start digging. Contractors must notify local utilities and operators of pipelines in the area in advance of digging. This is usually done by using the one-call system. Pipeline operators have communications established with one-call systems so that they are alerted about pending excavations in areas where they have underground facilities. When work notices are received, the utilities and pipeline operators check their records and confirm that their underground facilities will not be affected. In the event that they have facilities in or adjacent to the area, the operator will arrange to have temporary markings placed to mark the location of its pipeline. They may also have personnel on hand to oversee the excavation work. The color of the markings indicates the type of facilities underground. Red for electric lines, yellow for gas and oil, orange for communications lines, blue for water, purple for reclaimed water, green for sewer, pink for temporary survey markings, and white for the proposed excavation route. Now let's review the basics about excavation safety. A competent person who is knowledgeable, trained about excavation safety, and designated by the company should be in charge of all excavation and trenching operations. Do not enter an excavation or trench that is deeper than 5 feet unless it has been properly inspected by the competent person. There should be a proper ladder or ramp for getting into and out of the excavation or trench. Ladders must be safely secured and extend 3 feet above the surface level. Exit points should be no farther than 25 feet from where you are working. Enter a trench only after the proper protection is in place, sloping, benching, shoring, or a certified trench box. If you have any questions or concerns about the safety of an excavation or trench, tell your supervisor immediately. Any excavation, ditch, or work underground that is more than 5 feet deep requires special safety training to prevent accidental cave-in and collapse of dirt on workers in the hole. True or false? A competent person who is knowledgeable, trained, and authorized by the company should be in charge of all trenching and excavation operations. True or false? There should be a proper ladder or ramp for access or egress from an excavation. True or false? Starting work at the top of the day or when returning from a break, make a quick visual check of your work area before you begin. Keep materials, tools, and equipment in a secure and stable position to prevent falling or rolling. Keep only the tools and materials you need for the job in the work area. All unused tools and materials should be properly stored. Don't lay material or equipment on electrical cords or hoses. Clean up work areas as the job progresses, especially when you're finished. Place trash, scrap metal, oily rags, and other discards in their proper containers. To prevent accidents, when is the best time to make a visual check of your work area? Before you start work each shift, when you return from lunch or a break, immediately after an accident or near miss. 1 and 2 above. Every industry uses ladders. They are one of the oldest and most basic tools in the workplace. At the same time, thousands of workers are injured every year by falls from ladders. Let's review the safety basics for using this familiar tool. The first rule of ladder safety is to inspect the ladder. A competent person must inspect all ladders for visible defects regularly and after any occurrence that could affect safe use. Make sure that the ladder is stable, rated as strong enough for the task, in good condition, and safe to use. If ladders are found to be unsafe, they must be tagged, "Do not use," and removed from service. Rungs, cleats, and steps on ladders will be level and parallel. They also should be spaced apart uniformly to prevent a potential trip hazard. Check the rungs to be sure they are not slippery with grease, oil, or other contaminants. Inspect all parts of the ladder for missing parts or foot pads, physical damage, or irregularities. Do not use a metal or aluminum ladder while working with or around electrical components. When setting up an extension or straight ladder, follow the 4-to-1 rule. For every 4 feet of ladder length going up, there should be 1 foot of distance between the ladder's footing and the vertical surface on which the ladder is placed. For example, the base of an 8-foot ladder should be placed 2 feet from the wall. Never move, shift, or extend a ladder while someone is on it. When the worker on the ladder could have contact with exposed energized electrical equipment, only use a ladder that has non-conductive side rails. Never use, stand, or sit on the top step of a ladder. Always face the ladder when ascending or descending, and keep your belt buckle between both side rails as an easy way to ensure a safe center of gravity. Do not stand on the top 2 rungs of a ladder. Maintain 3-point contact while using a ladder. This requires the use of at least one hand when moving up or down. Workers will not carry tools, objects, or loads that could cause them to lose balance and fall. When it is necessary to raise or lower tools, objects, or loads from one level to the next, workers will use a rope or some other safe lifting method that does not involve carrying the load while going up or down the ladder. The ladder should extend 3 feet above the surface or landing you are accessing. During work, the ladder should be tied off and secured against falling. Never use a ladder in a horizontal position as scaffolding. The ladder should always extend at least 2 feet above the surface or landing you are accessing. True or false? Most of us have experienced a slip, trip, or even a fall at one time or another. Most times we do not sustain an injury, but the potential is high. The potential for a slip, trip, or fall to occur is always present due to the nature of the work performed. The most typical cause of this type of injury is not paying attention. In today's society, we tend to be in a hurry to complete a job or get from one place or another with a multitude of issues on our minds. Not paying attention to our surroundings can ultimately result in an injury. The steps to reducing these hazards are in identification and correction. Passageways, storerooms, and service rooms shall be kept clean and orderly and in a sanitary condition. The floor of every workroom must be kept in a clean and, so far as possible, a dry condition. Where wet processes are used, drainage shall be maintained, and false floors, platforms, mats, or other dry standing places should be provided where practicable. To facilitate cleaning, every floor, working place, and passageway shall be kept free from protruding nails, splinters, holes, or loose boards. Where mechanical handling equipment is used, sufficient safe clearances shall be allowed for aisles, at loading docks, through doorways, and wherever turns or passages must be made. Aisles and passageways shall be kept clear and in good repairs, with no obstruction across or in aisles that could create a hazard. Permanent aisles and passageways shall be appropriately marked. Covers and/or guardrails shall be provided to protect personnel from the hazards of open pits, tanks, vats, ditches, etc. Missing guardrails and covers must be reported to your supervisor and replaced immediately. In every building or other structure or part thereof, used for mercantile, business, industrial, or storage purposes, the loads approved by the building official shall be marked on plates of approved design, which shall be supplied and securely affixed by the owner of the building or his duly authorized agent in a conspicuous plates. Such plates shall not be removed or defaced, but if lost, removed, or defaced, shall be replaced by the owner or his agent. Reducing injuries on stairs involves attention to maintenance as well as individual safety habits. Stair treads should have a non-slip surface with an abrasive covering. Railings need to be in place and firmly anchored. Lighting in stairwells needs to be adequate for people to see where they are going. Basic steps to follow are: keep stairs clear at all times. Do not use stairs as storage areas. Always use the hand railing. Don't carry anything that blocks your vision. Keep one hand free to support yourself or break a fall. Watch where you are going at all times. All employees are responsible for good housekeeping. Poor housekeeping conditions could cause trips, slips, and falls. The following areas are prime concerns with level ground. Uneven surfaces are a major cause of trips and falls. Warped wood, loose or missing tiles, or mats and rugs that have turned up edges should be replaced or repaired immediately. Employees are not able to clearly see ahead of them or any obstruction in the way when lighting is poor. Ensure that adequate lighting is available in all work areas of your facilities. Replace burnt-out bulbs immediately. Anytime that materials, tools, and debris are left on the floor, accidents could happen. Always remove items from aisle and walkways. Do not use aisles as storage areas. Provide adequate trash cans for all waste debris. Power cords, cable, and hoses cause a trip hazard and are not to be used as a permanent means. Wet and smooth surfaces are often slippery. If possible, use a slip-resistant floor material where possible. Always have a de-ice material on hand for adverse weather conditions. Chemical spills need to be cleaned up immediately, no matter how small the spill. Slips, trips, and falls are especially common and troublesome because they can occur any time during any activity. Paying attention to your surroundings and eliminating potentially hazardous areas will reduce your chance of being injured. Here's some tips that will help to prevent most slips, trips, and falls. Wear shoes with non-skid soles and flat heels. Be careful of loose pant cuffs or other garments you could trip over. Stay away from the edges of loading docks, manholes, and similar places where falls could occur. Use a ladder, not a box or chair, to reach high places. Don't jump from platforms. Don't carry or push loads that block your vision. Use wrenches with good heads and teeth so they won't slip when you pull on them, and don't use a cheater on a wrench. If the job calls for a bigger wrench, use one. Look out for broken concrete, manholes, uncovered drains, and similar hazards. Walk slowly, sliding your feet on surfaces that are wet, slippery, or uneven. Step over or around obstructions, not on them. Make it your responsibility to report any hazards. Don't depend on someone else to do it. Pay attention to what you're doing and where you are going. Clean up spills and leaks right away. Passageways, storerooms, and service rooms shall be kept clean and orderly and in a sanitary condition. True or false? Covers and/or guardrails provide protection from the following hazards except 1. Open pits, 2. Tanks, 3. Ditches, 4. Broken ladders. Nearly everyone drives a vehicle to go to and from work each day. We don't think twice about driving our car or truck to work and home, on and off the job, alone and also with family and friends as passengers. Driving a vehicle may actually be the most dangerous part of your day. More than 1/3 of the on-the-job fatalities are the result of motor vehicle crashes. Here are a few tips for driving smart as well as safe. You've heard them before, but they are still lifesavers that good drivers pay close attention to each time they get behind the wheel. Check the condition of your vehicle before you get behind the wheel. Make sure that it is ready for the road. Check that your headlights, brake lights, turn signals, and tail lights are working properly. Replace any burned-out bulbs and wipe off dirty lenses for better visibility. Check your windshield for any damage or cracks that may obstruct your vision. Clean the windshield inside and out to reduce dirt and film that may cause excessive glare. Check your wiper blades for wear and damage and the washer fluid level. Check tires for proper inflation. It's best to check tires while they are cold to get a more accurate pressure reading. Tires should be inflated to the maximum air pressure recommended by the manufacturer. Also check the tires for excessive wear or bald spots. Look for any obvious damage and foreign objects stuck in the tire. Remember that low air pressure and worn tires can affect the overall control of your vehicle. Check vehicle fluid levels, including the radiator before the engine heats up and builds pressure on the cap, engine oil, brake fluid, power steering, and battery fluids. Inspect belts and hoses for leaks, cracking, or excessive wear. Once the vehicle is started, check the steering, brakes, and mirrors. Mirrors should be adjusted to give maximum vision. If any safety-sensitive components need repair, replacement, or maintenance, do not operate the vehicle until it is fixed. Before you shift into gear, make sure that your seat and shoulder belt are latched. Using your safety belts is the law. More importantly, you are around 6 times more likely to survive a motor vehicle crash when properly using seat belts and shoulder harnesses. Do not drive if you have been drinking an alcoholic beverage. More than half of all fatality accidents involve a driver who has been drinking. Drinking affects your judgment and coordination. Just 2 drinks in 1 hour can make you an unsafe and illegal driver. Another potential damage is the use of illegal drugs and medications. Some over-the-counter and prescription medicines can cause drowsiness. Check the label and follow the manufacturer's instructions. Be especially aware and careful if you're driving long distances or when you've had limited sleep. It's better to pull off the road and take a 20-minute power nap than doze off while driving and drift into a head-on crash or drive off the road. Safe driving requires your full attention. Don't be distracted by reading, looking at maps, or engaging in conversations with others in the vehicle. Use a hand-free cell device and not texting while driving. Watch your speed, follow posted limits, adjust your speed to road, weather, and traffic conditions. As a minimum, follow the 3-second rule. This means watching as the vehicle ahead passes a landmark, a sign, light pole, or mile marker, and then counting out 1001, 1002, 1003 to estimate 2 seconds of time before you pass that same landmark. This is an easy way to estimate that you're maintaining a safe following distance. Allow additional time, 3 or 4 seconds, for poor road and weather conditions. Avoid driving beside another car or truck for an extended distance. This increases your chances of winding up in their blind spot or their pulling into your lane without looking. Either speed up to get by or slow down and fall back. Defensive driving includes keeping a look ahead by at least 2 to 3 blocks. This may help you stay aware of potential hazards far enough in advance to take appropriate action. It is a strategy to avoid tunnel vision and failing to comprehend your overall highway situation. Once you arrive on the job site, make sure you park properly in a designated area. Your vehicle should not be blocking any driveways, loading docks, emergency routes, or lanes of travel. Only authorized employees will drive a motor vehicle in the course and scope of work while operating a company-owned vehicle. All employees who are authorized and required to drive in order to perform their job duties must be at least 18 years of age and possess a valid driver's license from their state of residency, or provide an alternate means of transportation which is approved by their supervisor. Accidents and traffic violations must be reported immediately. Authorized drivers will report any collision or near miss, vehicle breakdown, flat tire, call for road service, vandalism, or other damage to the vehicle occurring while they are driving a company-owned or rented vehicle or driving a private vehicle on company business. All loads will be secured. Manufacturer specifications for the legal limits of the vehicle will be followed. The vehicle must be of the correct size and must be of intended use for the job. Wearing a seatbelt is required by the company and by the law. You should fasten your seat and shoulder belts. When you see a police officer, when you leave the parking lot, before putting vehicle in gear, after putting vehicle in gear, and before moving. Many types of cranes, hoist, rigging components, and equipment are used in our industry. We need to be familiar with basic safety rules that apply to these types of operations. The most important rule is to never operate any crane or materials handling equipment unless you are trained, qualified, and authorized to do so. Qualified operators must understand all operating rules and principles for the equipment that they are using. They must inspect, test, and maintain the equipment in accordance with the manufacturer's recommendations. Never operate any equipment that has defective or damaged parts. Replace all components that show signs of excessive wear or defects that could affect the safe operation of the equipment. Check all wire ropes and rigging components. Riggers and others may have to work near a suspended load in order to guide it into position. This is a potentially dangerous situation. Using tag lines can help keep you out of harm's way. The tag line puts distance between you and the load in the event that it shifts or moves unexpectedly. Tag lines can help keep a load under control, but remember, your weight is no match against a load that has started to swing or spin and develop momentum. Let it settle down on its own. Under no circumstances is anyone allowed to stand or work under a suspended load. On the job site, it is often difficult to hear the person next to us. You can imagine the difficulty in hearing verbal commands from a guide or spotter directing crane, hoisting, or heavy equipment operations. The noise, distance away from the crane or machine operator, and visual barriers can make verbal communication nearly impossible. A qualified spotter will use hand signals to communicate with the operator. A set of signals should be agreed upon and adopted at each operation where hoisting equipment is used. Only the agreed-upon signal should be used by a designated person. However, in an emergency, anyone may give a stop signal. All persons should be in the clear before a signal is given to move a load or equipment. Qualified personnel will observe specific safety procedures whenever using a sling. Visually inspect the sling before use. Do not use a damaged or defective sling. Don't shorten a sling by using knots, bolts, or other makeshift methods. This weakens the sling's integrity and load lifting capacity. Don't let a sling become kinked. Make sure that the sling is securely attached to the loads and that the load is properly balanced in the sling. Don't place hands or fingers between the sling and its load while the sling is being tightened during the lift. Don't shock load a sling. Don't try to pull a sling out from under a load when the weight of that load is resting on the sling. Before assembling or disassembling crane equipment, determine if any part of the equipment could get closer than 20 feet to a power line during the assembly-disassembly process. If so, the employer must de-energize and ground the power line. Ensure that no part of the equipment gets closer than 20 feet to the power line. Also, determine the line's voltage and the minimum clearance permitted. Clearance distance depends on the line's voltage. When working near power lines, conduct planning meetings. Use tag lines that are non-conductive. Use a dedicated spotter. Be equipped with a visual aid to assist in identifying minimum clearance distance. Be positioned to effectively gauge the clearance distance, and use equipment that enables the dedicated spotter to communicate with the operator. A spotter is needed when the point of operation, meaning the load travel or the area near or at load placement, is not in full view of the operator. When the equipment is traveling, the view in the direction of travel is obstructed. During operations requiring signals, the ability to transmit signals between the operator and the signal person must be maintained. If that ability is interrupted at any time, the operator must safely stop operations requiring signals until it is reestablished and a proper signal is given and understood. Spotters need to be aware of all hazards. Anticipate situations in which a spotter would help prevent an incident. Spotter should be located in an area where the driver easily sees the spotter. Spotters cannot perform any other duties while directing a backing vehicle. They must receive training and wear appropriate PPE and a high-visibility vest. It is okay to walk or stand under a suspended load as long as the rigging of the load has been approved by a competent person. True or false? Which of the following statements are true for using a sling? Damaged sling should be thrown away. It is okay to tie knots into a sling to make it shorter. It is okay to use a sling that has kinks. It is okay to shock load a sling. Many types of cranes, hoist, rigging components, and equipment are used in our industry. We need to be familiar with basic safety rules that apply to these types of operations. The most important rule is to never operate any crane or materials handling equipment unless you are trained, qualified, and authorized to do so. Qualified operators must understand all operating rules and principles for the equipment that they are using. They must inspect, test, and maintain the equipment in accordance with the manufacturer's recommendations. Never operate any equipment that has defective or damaged parts. Replace all components that show signs of excessive wear or defects that could affect the safe operation of the equipment. Check all wire ropes and rigging components. Riggers and others may have to work near a suspended load in order to guide it into position. This is a potentially dangerous situation. Using tag lines can help keep you out of harm's way. The tag line puts distance between you and the load in the event that it shifts or moves unexpectedly. Tag lines can help keep a load under control, but remember, your weight is no match against a load that has started to swing or spin and develop momentum. Let it settle down on its own. Under no circumstances is anyone allowed to stand or work under a suspended load. On the job site, it is often difficult to hear the person next to us. You can imagine the difficulty in hearing verbal commands from a guide or spotter directing crane, hoisting, or heavy equipment operations. The noise, distance away from the crane or machine operator, and visual barriers can make verbal communication nearly impossible. A qualified spotter will use hand signals to communicate with the operator. A set of signals should be agreed upon and adopted at each operation where hoisting equipment is used. Only the agreed-upon signal should be used by a designated person. However, in an emergency, anyone may give a stop signal. All persons should be in the clear before a signal is given to move a load or equipment. Qualified personnel will observe specific safety procedures whenever using a sling. Visually inspect the sling before use. Do not use a damaged or defective sling. Don't shorten a sling by using knots, bolts, or other makeshift methods. This weakens the sling's integrity and load lifting capacity. Don't let a sling become kinked. Make sure that the sling is securely attached to the loads and that the load is properly balanced in the sling. Don't place hands or fingers between the sling and its load while the sling is being tightened during the lift. Don't shock load a sling. Don't try to pull a sling out from under a load when the weight of that load is resting on the sling. Before assembling or disassembling crane equipment, determine if any part of the equipment could get closer than 20 feet to a power line during the assembly-disassembly process. If so, the employer must de-energize and ground the power line. Ensure that no part of the equipment gets closer than 20 feet to the power line. Also, determine the line's voltage and the minimum clearance permitted. Clearance distance depends on the line's voltage. When working near power lines, conduct planning meetings. Use tag lines that are non-conductive. Use a dedicated spotter. Be equipped with a visual aid to assist in identifying minimum clearance distance. Be positioned to effectively gauge the clearance distance, and use equipment that enables the dedicated spotter to communicate with the operator. A spotter is needed when the point of operation, meaning the load travel or the area near or at load placement, is not in full view of the operator. When the equipment is traveling, the view in the direction of travel is obstructed. During operations requiring signals, the ability to transmit signals between the operator and the signal person must be maintained. If that ability is interrupted at any time, the operator must safely stop operations requiring signals until it is reestablished and a proper signal is given and understood. Spotters need to be aware of all hazards. Anticipate situations in which a spotter would help prevent an incident. Spotter should be located in an area where the driver easily sees the spotter. Spotters cannot perform any other duties while directing a backing vehicle. They must receive training and wear appropriate PPE and a high-visibility vest. It is okay to walk or stand under a suspended load as long as the rigging of the load has been approved by a competent person. True or false? Which of the following statements are true for using a sling? Damaged sling should be thrown away. It is okay to tie knots into a sling to make it shorter. It is okay to use a sling that has kinks. It is okay to shock load a sling. Signs and symbols shall be visible at all times when work is being performed, and shall be removed promptly when the hazard no longer exists. Danger signs shall be used only where an immediate hazard exists. Caution signs shall be used only to warn against potential hazards or to caution against unsafe practices. Safety instruction signs shall be used for general safety information, safety instructions, and slogans. Traffic signs shall be posted in construction areas at points of hazard and shall conform to American National Standards Institute D6.1 Manual on uniform traffic control devices and streets and highways. Accident prevention tags shall be used as a temporary means of warning employees of an existing hazard, such as defective tools, equipment which is out of order, etc. They shall not be used in place of or as a substitute for accident prevention signs. Homemade or job-made signs should be replaced as soon as possible. Barricades are required around excavations, holes or openings in floor or roof areas, at edges of roofs and elevated work platforms, and around every surface that is 6 feet or more above an adjacent floor or the ground. Barricades must be erected whenever necessary to warn people against falling in, through, or off surfaces or overhead hazards. Barricades are for warning purposes only and shall not be used in lieu of standard handrails. Note: anyone who makes a hole or opening is responsible for barricading it. Barricades must be 42 inches high, square, and level. Keep barricades 5 feet back from the edge of the hazard. Barricades are to be constantly maintained. Barricades should be placed around rotating equipment such as crawler cranes and track hose to prevent workers from being caught in pinch points or being struck by rotating equipment. The person who puts up a barricade is the owner or manager of the barricade. To go through the barricade, one must ask permission from the person who constructed the barricade. When must temporary signs be removed? 15 days, 10 days, 30 days, ASAP. Barricades must be blank inches high, square, and level. 40, 42, 44, 48. Here's a 3-word phrase you need to know about: process safety management. Your duties on a pipeline may involve work in a chemical plant or process facility that operates under a written process safety management program. This program will contain very specific safety requirements for each contract employee performing work at that location. Process safety management, also called simply PSM, is an OSHA standard intended to prevent an incident like the 1984 Bhopal disaster. In this standard, OSHA defines process as the use, storage, manufacturing, handling, or the on-site movement of any highly hazardous chemical. Under the PSM standards, OSHA specifies safety and health responsibilities for both operators and contractors. Operator responsibilities include evaluating each contractor's safety and health programs, training, and performance. Operators are charged with making sure that contractors follow safety and health procedures as specified in the location's written PSM program. Operators can only use contract personnel who are trained and qualified to do their work safely and in accordance with facility PSM requirements. If there are any known potential fire, explosion, or toxic release hazards at the plant or process location, the operator must inform each contractor about the risks. For their part, contractors must assure that each employee working at a PSM location is properly trained and qualified to do their job safely. Training must be documented, and contract employees must do work the way they were trained. You can never know who will be the first person to see something going wrong. That's why each contract employee is responsible for informing the operator's site superintendent or safety representative if he or she sees or suspects a hazard, leak, or any situation which could cause an incident. Immediately reporting of a suspected problem or abnormal condition is always crucial. Early discovery and fast response often makes the difference. Sometimes many lives are saved thanks to one person's paying attention and acting quickly. In the OSHA standard for process safety management, the term process means blank of a highly hazardous chemical. Use, storage, manufacturing, handling and movement, all of the above. Under PSM, each contractor employee is responsible for informing the site superintendent or safety representative if which of the following is observed: hazard, leak, anything that can cause an accident, all of the above. The company strives to safeguard employees from those musculoskeletal disorders associated with chronic exposure to conditions in the employee's work environment by assessing the physical requirements of a job and addressing those ergonomic hazards and conditions that may be technologically and feasibly abated. An ergonomics program usually consists of the following elements: work site analysis, to identify existing hazards, conditions, and operations that create hazards and areas where potential hazards may develop. Hazard prevention and control. Effective workstation design and the comfort of the worker are important considerations. The design should facilitate ease of adjustment and/or modification given the nature of the project. Design of work methods to reduce static, extreme, and awkward postures. Repetitive motion and excessive force should be taken into consideration when approaching any work effort. Training and education. The company will promote workplace education and awareness with programs aimed at the maintenance of musculoskeletal health and the prevention of injuries. An ergonomics program usually consists of the following elements except worksite analysis, yearly physicals mandated, hazard prevention and control, training and education. Blank is to identify existing hazards, conditions, and operations that create hazards and areas where potential hazards may develop. Hazard prevention, training, work site analysis, BBS program. Guidelines are to be used when working within an operating right-of-way and for the safety of the surveyor and the railroad. Always notify a railroad company or authority of survey work to be done within the railroad right-of-way. Always be alert around railroads. Railroad equipment is not always heard, especially if there is other noise. If a railroad car or locomotive is coasting, or if the train is moving slowly, hearing alone might not provide adequate protection. When necessary, use a lookout. Never crawl under stopped cars and do not cross tracks between closely spaced cars. They might be bumped at any time. The engineer and brakeman work only one side of the train. Do not leave protruding stakes or any holes within 10 feet of the center line of the tracks. Do not park vehicles within 10 feet of the tracks. Train crews need this area for operations. Always notify the railroad company or authority of survey work to be done with the railroad right-of-way. True or false? Vehicles must be parked at least what distance from the tracks? 5 feet, 6 feet, 10 feet, 15 feet. Hydrogen sulfide, H2S, is a highly toxic, colorless gas, 1.2 times heavier than air, soluble in water, with the odor of rotten eggs in low concentrations. It is produced in toxic concentrations along with crude oil, water, and gas in certain producing fields. Activities in suspected areas that may lead to exposure include, but are not limited to, surveying near existing pipelines and working in confined spaces. H2S may also be present around sulfur mining operations at wells, ditches, and settling ponds. Where H2S is encountered or suspected initially in the field, measurements shall be made to determine concentrations and potential exposure levels. In addition, the safety department shall be notified so appropriate protective measures can be implemented. Some facilities and work areas require the use of respiratory protection equipment. Employees who may be exposed to H2S shall wear the appropriate NIOSH certified self-contained breathing apparatus or airline respirator with an escape SCBA as required by OSHA. H2S is an extremely toxic and irritating gas. The principal potential hazard is asphyxiation by inhalation of the gas. H2S reduces the oxygen carrying capacity of the bloodstream, depressing the nervous system. Sufficiently high concentration can result in immediate collapse and death from respiratory failure and asphyxiation. Exposure to concentrations of H2S greater than 600 parts per million ppm can cause immediate death. The rotten egg odor is not a reliable warning sign because the higher concentrations, approximately 100 ppm and greater, temporarily deaden the sense of smell. An exposed person may not detect the presence of H2S and consequently inhale lethal amounts. The only positive means of determining the amount of H2S present is by testing with an approved H2S detector. However, if H2S is detected by smell, immediately evacuate upwind. Effects at different concentrations. This is the ppm versus the potential effect. 10 to 20 ppm, eye irritation, especially hypersensitive workers. 20 to 100 ppm, inflammation, corneal blistering and opacity of the eye, loss of smell, headache, cough, nausea. 100 to 300 ppm, respiratory difficulty, pulmonary edema, respiratory depression and irritation within 30 minutes to 8 hours. 300 to 600 ppm, central and peripheral nervous system effects, for example, tremors, weakness, numbness of extremities, unconsciousness, and convulsions within several minutes to 8 hours. 600 to 1000 ppm, rapid unconsciousness from one breath to several minutes resulting in death if emergency aid is not properly administered. 1000 and greater ppm, instantaneous cessation of breathing and death. Various types of monitoring equipment are available to detect the presence of H2S. At minimum, detection equipment shall alarm when the PEL exceeds the preset level of 20 ppm. The safety department shall be consulted on any type of equipment necessary and use and training of equipment. When detection equipment sounds, employees must vacate the area and shall not re-enter until proper respiratory protection is utilized. Employees shall not work in an H2S area without first receiving training on the potential hazards associated with H2S, in the use of necessary respiratory protection, emergency response, and first aid. Employees should also be trained in the client's site-specific contingency plan prior to performing work in possible H2S areas. This training shall be done at least annually or as each individual job requires. H2S is a highly toxic gas, 1.2 times heavier than air, with a light green color and smelling of rotten eggs at high concentrations. True or false? If an H2S release is detected, the safest place to be is in a ditch downwind from the release. True or false? In a project where asbestos is present, a written asbestos control program shall be developed and implemented. The written asbestos control program shall include a periodic physical assessment of the condition of the materials, a periodic hazard assessment including air sampling, a plan which includes specific procedures for performing small-scale, short-duration removal for maintenance purposes. A system shall be in place to protect employees who participate in activities related to the disturbance of ACM, which addresses exposure assessment, air monitoring, respiratory protection, medical monitoring, and employee training. Wherever operations and maintenance or any removal is performed, whether short-term or full-scale projects, a permit procedure shall be used in which a qualified person shall be required prior to approve any work which will intentionally, or potentially disturb ACM. Several states and local governments have separate requirements for asbestos work in areas that come under their jurisdiction. The company does not perform asbestos abatement due to insurance restrictions and liability concerns. If it is unknown if the pipeline contains ACM, it should be tested after removal. True or false? Small fibers invisible to the eye can enter the lung and cause scarring. True or false? When possible, use gates or avoid crossing fences altogether. If you are required, the use of portable chain-link fence climber steps or a trestle ladder are recommended. Do not attempt to carry anything when climbing on or over obstacles. Cross barbed wire fences at the center of a span and have a coworker hold the wires for you. When stepping over barbed wire fence, lay a piece of heavy canvas such as an empty material bag over the top strand, and always wear gloves when crossing a barbed wire fence. When crossing barbed wire fences, always cross next to a post due to increased stability. True or false? Using a barrier cream can sometimes protect you when brushing up against poisonous plants. Therefore, when you are going into an area with poisonous plants, apply protective cream. Your pre-inspection of an area listed on your JSA will alert you to poisonous plants in the area. Poison ivy, poison oak, and poison sumac can cause skin irritation. Learn to recognize these plants so that you can avoid them. Furthermore, if you know you have touched them, you can start first aid before symptoms appear. The sooner first aid is given for exposure, the milder the effects will be. Using a blank can sometimes protect you when brushing up against poisonous plants. Barrier cream, long-sleeve shirts, camouflage, decoy device. All except the following can cause skin irritation: poison ivy, poison oak, prickly plants, poison sumac. Assume that all animals are potentially dangerous. Have owners secure hostile-acting animals before entering enclosures containing such animals. Do not enter an enclosure with high fences if a hazardous animal is within. Do not approach, attempt to capture or kill, or attempt to pet either domesticated or wild creatures. This includes snakes and other reptiles. Be especially wary of sick-appearing animals, animals with young, stallions, bulls, and guard dogs. Do not handle dead or seemingly dead animals, fowl, or reptiles. Each summer, new cases of tick-borne illnesses like Rocky Mountain spotted fever, Lyme's disease, and ehrlichiosis surge in the United States. Hot zones for tick trouble include the northeastern and southeastern states, as well as parts of the Midwest, Texas, and California. A few simple rules from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention can help you and your crew avoid tick problems and still get the job done. Snake bites of surveyors are quite rare. Always take the following precautions. Always assume snakes are active. Do not relax your visual on sunny winter days. When traversing brush or grassy terrain, use a decoy such as a level rod or a lathe alongside your legs. Walk heavily to create vibrations that can be felt by snakes. A snake does not hear. Walk away from the shaded side of clumps and brushes when the weather is hot and sunny. Avoid steep hills if possible, where a snake uphill from you could strike the upper portions of your body. Bites on the torso, the neck, and the head are much more damaging and more difficult to treat than those on the limbs. Do not attempt under any circumstances to capture snakes. Do not try to kill a snake, unless it is a positive threat to safety. When necessary to move low-lying logs, large rocks, and boards, use a pry bar, not your hands. Wear high-leather snake boots or snake leggings in high-hazard areas. Remember that rattlesnakes do not always signal their presence by rattling. When traversing brush or grassy terrain, use a blank to protect your limbs. Decoy, heavy rock, makeshift spear, capturing device. Rattlesnakes always signal their presence by rattling. True or false? The company and/or their designated representatives have a right to access relevant exposure and medical records. Unless a specific occupational safety and health standard provides a different period of time, the company shall assure the preservation and retention of records as follows. The medical record for each employee shall be preserved and maintained for at least the duration of employment, plus 30 years, except that the following types of records need not be retained for any specified period. First aid records, not including medical history of one-time treatment and subsequent observation of minor scratches, cuts, burns, splinters, and the like, which do not involve medical treatment, loss of consciousness. The medical records of employees who have worked for less than 1 year for the employer need not be retained beyond the term of employment if they are provided to the employee upon the termination of employment. Each employee exposure record shall be preserved and maintained for at least 30 years, except that background data to environmental, workplace monitoring or measuring, such as laboratory reports and worksheets, need only be retained for 1 year so long as the sampling results, the collection methodology, sampling plan, a description of the analytical and mathematical methods used, and a summary of other background data relevant to interpretation of the results obtained are retained for at least 30 years. And safety data sheets and records concerning the identity of a substance or agent need not be retained for any specified period, as long biological monitoring results designated as exposure records by specific occupational safety and health records shall be preserved and maintained as required by the specific standard. Whenever an employee or designated representative requests access to a record, the company shall assure that access is provided in a reasonable time, place, and manner. If we cannot reasonably provide access to the record within 15 working days, we shall, within the 15 working days, apprise the employee or designated representative requesting the record of the reason for the delay and the earliest date when the record can be made available. The company may require of the requester only such information as should be readily known to the requester and which may be necessary to locate or identify the records being requested, such as dates and locations where the employee worked during the time period in question. Whenever an employee or designated representative requests a copy of a record, the employer shall assure that either a copy of the record is provided without cost to the employee or representative, the necessary mechanical copying facilities, such as photocopying, are made available without cost to the employee or representative for copying the record, or the record is loaned to the employee or representative for a reasonable time to enable a copy to be made. In the case of an original X-ray, the company may restrict access to on-site examination or make other suitable arrangements for the temporary loan of the X-ray. The medical records for each employee shall be preserved and maintained for at least the duration of employment plus 10 years, 20 years, 25 years, 30 years. If the company cannot reasonably provide access to the record within 15 working days, they shall be allowed 30 more working days to provide the record. True or false? Most fixed-site jobs in buildings, factories, and warehouses expose employees to hazards when they work by themselves. When this is the case, A plan or work alone policy should be followed. An employee is considered as working alone if they are working by his or herself such that assistance is not readily available should some injury, illness, or emergency occur. First, a hazard assessment needs to be done to evaluate the risks of working alone and identify control measures. The following steps can help provide a safe environment for employees working alone or in isolation. Identify all positions that require employees to work alone. Understand all the hazards associated with each position to ensure they can be reduced or controlled. This includes both the working environment and work procedures. Repeat this hazard assessment on a regular basis because hazards can change over time. Communicate this assessment to both management and employees. Train workers to be aware of their surroundings. In high-risk jobs, consider a mandatory policy that employees must work in pairs. Establish check-in procedures. Employees can stay in touch through cell phones, radio, panic buttons, or buddy systems. The regularity of checks will depend upon the hazards and risks identified. Safe work procedures. Having written safe work procedures for hazardous work is necessary. Equipment safety. The employer must ensure that workers use equipment as intended and according to the manufacturer's design limits. All equipment used in a workplace must be maintained in good working condition, whether or not it is being used in a working alone situation. Equipment and supplies. In addition to proper equipment, first aid and emergency supplies must be provided to workers who are working alone at a work site. If workers are working alone in a remote location, the employer should establish a sign-out procedure to track their whereabouts. An overdue employee procedure should also be in place for locating workers who fail to report on time. Although OSHA does not have a specific requirement to implement a work-alone policy, failure to have a policy could be considered a general duty OSHA requirement and has been cited by OSHA in the past under the General Duty Statute. An employee is considered as working alone if they are working by his or herself such that assistance is not readily available should some injury, illness, or emergency occur. True or false? Employees must be physically fit to perform their job function and receive proper training for the assigned task. Safe work policies and procedures must be followed. Report to work fit for duty, unimpaired by alcohol, drugs, or fatigue. An individual is fit for duty when he or she is neither mentally nor physically impaired from any cause that could affect job performance. These impairments could be the result of over-the-counter medications, physical illness, mental illness, substance abuse, mental stress and/or fatigue and contributing factors to decreased mental alertness. Fatigue affects everything we do, physically and mentally. When workers are fatigued, they are unaware of how badly they are performing. Employees must inform their supervisor of any over-the-counter or prescription medication they may be taking. Workers who report for duty or are on duty while knowingly impaired may face disciplinary charges up to and including termination. Pre-employment, random, and post-accident drug screenings are mandatory. Refusal to submit to a test may result in termination. Use of alcohol and drugs are forbidden on the job site. If an employee is found to be under the influence of a mind and body-altering substance, that employee will be removed from the job site immediately and be subject to termination. Supervisors must regularly observe the activities of workers on site to determine if they are under the influence of drugs or alcohol, are impaired due to illness, or are suffering from the effects of fatigue. Notify your supervisor immediately if there are any conditions that may affect your ability to safely and competently perform your duties. Employees don't have to inform their supervisor of any over-the-counter or prescription medication they may be taking. True or false? Research reveals shift work in general creates fatigue risk. Shift work has been associated with gastrointestinal and cardiovascular complaints, type 2 diabetes, breast and prostate cancer, and depression. Shift workers aren't the only types of employees who are susceptible to fatigue. Other factors contributing to fatigue include time elapsed since last sleep and the length of last sleep. Unusual work shifts can be more stressful physically, mentally, and emotionally. Non-traditional shifts and extended work hours may confuse the body's regular schedule, leading to fatigue, stress, and lack of concentration. These effects may lead to an increased risk of operator error, injuries, and/or accidents. Fatigue is a message to your body that it needs to rest. Some factors that can lead to increased fatigue include overnight shifts, high risk and repetitive jobs, a lack of regular rest periods, work sets that extend beyond the industry standard, failing to take time off at regular intervals. Supervisors must recognize signs and symptoms associated with extended and unusual work shifts. Workers who are being asked to work extended or irregular shifts should be monitored for the signs and symptoms of fatigue. Any employee showing such signs should be evaluated and possibly directed to leave the active area and seek rest. Some of the most common symptoms of fatigue include weariness, sleepiness, irritability, reduced alertness and/or lack of concentration and memory, lack of motivation, increased susceptibility to illness, depression, headache, giddiness, loss of appetite, and digestive problems. To effectively manage fatigue, have periodic assessments of staffing levels to ensure that work hours are reasonable. Take into account production demands, workload fluctuations across shifts, weeks and months, and planned, unplanned outages. Fatigue management training for employees, their family members, and supervisors to help them recognize signs of fatigue and create awareness of the need for uninterrupted hours of sleep. Sleep patterns at home impact work performance. Analysis of work environment and conditions, with focus on the effects of lighting, bright lighting where possible, and indirect lighting to minimize eye strain. Individual risk assessment and mitigation. Employees are encouraged to be aware of their own and their coworkers' fatigue levels. Call for programs to address sleep disorders. In addition, supervisors have authority to take appropriate steps to ensure employees are fit for duty. Investigate the degree to which fatigue plays a role in accidents and near-miss incidents. Factors to consider include the time of the incident, shift pattern, number of consecutive shifts worked, number of hours awake, and number of hours slept in the last 24 hours for individuals involved in the incident or accident. Extended shifts should occur only to cover unplanned open shifts or safety-critical tasks. Periodic assessments of effectiveness and identification of opportunities for continuous quality improvement. Targets should be established and performance measured in key areas such as percentage overtime, number of open shifts, number of extended shifts, and number of exceptions. Workers must report fatigue to supervisors so they can take appropriate action to assist the workers. Which factor does not lead to increased fatigue? A lack of regular rest periods, boredom, high risk and repetitive jobs, overnight shifts. Factors contributing to fatigue include time elapsed since last sleep and the length of last sleep. True or false? Exposure to freezing and cold temperatures for long periods of time may cause serious health problems such as trench foot, frostbite, and hypothermia. In extreme cases, including cold water submersion, exposure can lead to death. Trouble signs include uncontrolled shivering, slurred speech, clumsy movements, fatigue, and confused behavior. If you observe any of these signs, call immediately for emergency help. Factors that contribute to cold stress include cold temperatures, high or cold wind, dampness, and cold water. A cold environment makes the body work harder to maintain proper temperature. Recognize the environmental and workplace conditions that may be dangerous. Learn the signs and symptoms of cold-induced illnesses and injuries and what to do to help employees. Train employees about cold-induced illnesses and injuries. Encourage employees to wear proper clothing for cold, wet, and windy conditions, including layers that can be adjusted to temperature changes. Be sure that employees in extremely cold conditions take frequent short breaks in warm, dry shelters to allow their bodies to warm up. Try to schedule work for the warmest part of the day. Avoid exhaustion or fatigue because energy is needed to keep muscles warm. Work in pairs so that one employee can recognize danger signs. Drink warm, sweet beverages, sugar water, sports-type drinks, and avoid drinks with caffeine, coffee, tea, sodas, or hot chocolate, or alcohol. Eat warm, high-calorie foods. Risk increase when employees take certain medications, are in poor physical condition, or suffer from illnesses such as diabetes, hypertension, or cardiovascular disease. There are several things you can do to keep warm and prevent cold weather-related illnesses. The first thing we want to do is to keep your body temperature at or about normal, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. This can be accomplished by wearing layers of clothing both inside and outdoors. Always wear cotton or lightweight wool next to the skin and wool layers over your undergarments. Keep dry by having proper rain gear available and a pair of good waterproof boots. An extra pair of clean, dry socks can really come in handy. Do not forget to protect your neck and ears. You can lose a lot of heat from these two areas, and a good pair of gloves is essential. It is obvious that below freezing conditions, along with inadequate clothing, could bring about cold stress. It is important to understand that it can also be brought about by temperatures in the 50s, coupled with some rain and wind. Exposure to freezing and cold temperatures for long periods of time may cause serious health problems, such as trench foot, frostbite, and depression. True or false? A cold environment makes the body work harder to maintain proper temperature. True or false? Often, work is to be performed in hot environments for long periods of time. When the body is not able to maintain a normal temperature, heat-related illness can occur and may be deadly. We will look at ways to guard yourself from heat illness, as well as measures your employer should take to prevent heat-related illness and death. Let's look at some of the factors that will increase your risk to heat illnesses. High temperature and humidity. Direct sun exposure with no shade. Indoor exposure to other sources of radiant heat, such as ovens and furnaces. Limited or no air movement. Not drinking enough liquids. Hard physical work. Heavy personal protective clothing and equipment. Poor physical condition or health problems. Some medications, for example, different kinds of blood pressure pills or antihistamines. Pregnancy. Not used to working in hot environments. Previous heat-related illness. Advanced age, 65 plus. Heat stroke, heat exhaustion, heat cramps, and heat rash are the most common heat-related illnesses. Heat stroke is the most serious heat-related health problem. Heat stroke occurs when the body fails to cool properly, causing the temperature to rise to critical levels. Heat stroke is a medical emergency that may rapidly result in death. Symptoms of heat stroke include confusion, loss of consciousness, seizures, very high body temperature, hot, dry skin or profuse sweating. If a worker shows signs of heat stroke. While first aid measures are being implemented, call 911 and get emergency medical help. Make sure that someone stays with the worker until help arrives. Move the worker to a shaded, cool area and remove outer clothing. Wet the worker with cool water and circulate the air to speed cooling. Place cold, wet clothes or ice all over the body or soak the worker's clothing with cold water. Heat exhaustion is the next most serious heat-related health problem. Symptoms of heat exhaustion: headache, nausea, dizziness, weakness, irritability, thirst, heavy sweating, elevated body temperature, decreased urine output. If a worker shows signs of possible heat exhaustion, workers with signs or symptoms of heat exhaustion should be taken to a clinic or emergency room for medical evaluation and treatment. If medical care is not available, call 911 immediately. Make sure that someone stays with the worker until help arrives. Workers should be removed from the hot area and given liquids to drink. Remove unnecessary clothing, including shoes and socks. Cool the worker with cold compresses to the head, neck, and face, or have the worker wash his or her head, face, and neck with cold water. Have the worker drink cool water. If the worker is unable to drink, get emergency medical help immediately. Heat cramps are muscle pains usually caused by physical labor in a hot work environment. Heat cramps are caused by the loss of body salts and fluid during sweating. If a worker shows signs of possible heat cramps, replace fluid loss by drinking water and having a snack and/or carbohydrate electrolyte replacement liquids, for example, sports drinks, every 15 to 20 minutes. Workers should avoid salt tablets. Get medical help if the worker has heart problems, is on a low-sodium diet, or if cramps do not subside within 1 hour. Heat rash is the most common problem in hot work environments. Heat rash is caused by sweating and looks like a red cluster of pimples or small blisters. Heat rash usually appears on the neck, upper chest, in the groin, under the breasts, and in elbow creases. If a worker shows signs of possible heat rash, the best treatment for heat rash is to provide a cooler, less humid work environment. The rash area should be kept dry. Powder may be applied to increase comfort. Ointments and creams should not be used on a heat rash. Anything that makes the skin warm or moist may make the rash worse. It is important to immediately report any of the above signs and symptoms of heat illness. Inform your supervisor immediately. Now, some precautions to take that will prevent heat illness and supervisor's responsibilities. If shade is not available, your employer must provide shaded areas to prevent or recover from heat illness. There must be plenty of clean, cool drinking water on site at all times. All employees who work outdoors in the heat or in hot environments, and all supervisors, must be trained on the risks and prevention of heat illness, including how to recognize symptoms and respond when they happen. Supervisors must take into account the age, weight, and general health of workers before they are assigned tasks. All are factors that will increase your risk to heat illnesses except not drinking enough liquids, hard physical work, limited or no air movement, personal protective clothing and equipment. Heat stroke, heat exhaustion, heat cramps, and heat rash are not the most common heat-related illnesses. True or false? All projects should have clean lunch areas and clean drinking water made available in proper containers and with individual cups. Approved trash containers should be available to separate and properly dispose of discarded cups and other trash. Portable toilets must be provided at a ratio of 1 for every 20 workers on the project, or transportation must be provided to proper toilet facilities that are readily available. We've covered a wide range of topics in today's video. Each part is just as important as the next. And we must work together to make sure safety is a top priority every day. Make it your job to know the safety guidelines and use them. Follow all permit requirements. And if you have questions, ask your supervisor. They have your safety in mind. Let's end this orientation where we started, saying one more time that we must all work together to follow safety rules and practice safe work procedures. That's called safety awareness, and it really does work.